So I'm now going to combine days 8 and 9, which were Mull and Iona, and partially that's because my GoPro was bust, so I've no footage, just a plan for how to get one, which I'll get into later. But Mull, I have to say, was much more spectacular than I expected, and leaving Iona is actually fantastic by ferry. For some reason, I never really researched Mull very well. It was just the route to Iona. But in fact, it's an absolutely spectacular location. There's multiple fantastic views. The cycling is pretty good. A bit too much traffic, obviously, on the main route with all the tourists, but sure, you get used to that. A very impressive pass that there's cottages at the top of. And then a very fast descent into the valley below. Now, while that looks idyllic, and it is, there's heavy rain due in 28 minutes, and I'm at least an hour from the nearest shelter, so I think I'm about to get wet. Ah well, first time on the whole trip, so I guess you can't really complain if your 8th day in Scotland you get rained on. I will be complaining. I'll correct myself, it's not quite the top of the pass, the top is actually a little bit further on, but I was lucky in terms of the rain. It was quite light when it arrived, and I'd managed to get down into the coastline before it came. The remaining section to Iona is a road that follows the coast. There's a fair few ups and downs on that, and some fantastic views across it, but perhaps the last 10 kilometres or so gets a little repetitive with all the ups and downs, and also too many camper vans and coaches for that section. But then to Iona, there are several ferry crossings per day, with the last being about 6:15 in the evening in the summer. And it's a passenger-only service. You need a special dispensation or licence to bring a vehicle onto the island. But of course you can bring a bicycle, which is handy enough. Now Iona is very small, so it's not like there's much cycling to be done over there. But if you like me, are bike packing and carrying loads of camping gear there, your bike's also kind of wheelbarrow for carrying all that stuff around. Again, another beautiful ferry crossing. I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but Iona, which is a modern-day Christian pilgrimage site, and has been something similar to that going back perhaps to the 7th or 8th century, when an Irish saint settled it as part of the Christianisation of Scotland. It has some beautiful beaches for swimming on, which I took advantage of. There's at least 4 or 5 of them. They're all over the place. And because I had done, I think, my first 600 kilometres, I decided it was time to treat myself to a decent meal in the hotel. It was also the only place that was actually open in the evening, so plan better than me and have food with you. It's a good lesson. The big advantage of camping on Iona is that there's no tourists, or very, very few around in the evening, so you have the sites, this is the nunnery, for instance, to yourself pretty much, and you can just wander around. It was quite crowded even out of season during the day when I arrived, so I reckon that's quite worth Of interest to me is that even before it became a Christian centre of religion, Iona appeared to have been used by the Druids in a similar way, according to one Roman report. But at that stage, the island was covered in oak trees, which must have looked pretty impressive. The current landscape is presumably due to overgrazing, as in many other places in Ireland, Scotland. There's a load of fantastic walks around the island. In fact, the island itself is probably just a fantastic walk. You could just walk the entire coastline, many parts of which have a particular historical connotations. Again, the advantage of staying on Iona, there's a good campsite, was that you pretty much have the place to yourself. There's only a handful of other people I came across in my wanderings, especially around the Abbey, where there was some sort of service in progress. So a final thing which is quite interesting is that the small church beside the Abbey, which is the oldest church in the island, has a weird little bit of explanation about the cousin of Columba offering to be buried alive to consecrate it. Now, that very obviously isn't in the Bible, but is some older tradition. So the next morning, it was the ferry back across again and another cycle across Mull. And this time, rather than taking the same high pass on the main road that I took coming in, I instead took an alternative route, which goes around Ben Moor, which is the huge mountain in the middle. That's got very narrow, rough roads, but some really spectacular views with it, and it's well worth looking at. In some respects, Scotland and Ireland are almost identical. Hello, sheep. There are a lot of sheep on the quiet roads here as well. It's definitely another one of those roads where there's quite a lot of climbing, but you know, you don't get the views without the climbing, and you also don't get the descents without the climbing, so that's why you do it for. And here we are at the top of yet another pass. This one is going alongside Ben Moor on the Mull Peninsula. Oh, well, Mull is an island, not a peninsula actually. Ben Moor is up that way somewhere. We're about to come down to the coast and follow that round to Salem, which is where I'm planning to go tonight. This was a particularly spectacular descent, to be fair. The landscape is somewhat reminiscent of Sligo in parts, but yes, so far my Scottish trip is giving me one amazing landscape after another, and this is definitely no exception. Well worth doing it. Be aware the roads are pretty chewed up on parts, so I think it might again be tough on a road bike. I don't think road biking Scotland, you're basically stuck on the A ones, or maybe fixing a lot of punctures, but it's not really my area. Somebody could perhaps comment on this and confirm if my feelings are right, but yeah, quite a descent, and even when you get down to the coast, it's still pretty crazy down there, because there's some real cliff hugging bits, and winter has broken up the roads quite badly in part, possibly heavy lorries too, so that can be a little tough. One aspect in which Ireland and Scotland are very similar is the sheep. Regularly hitting sheep traffic jams on the roads. These guys have picked the wrong place. Go on, go downhill. Don't be silly. Go downhill. Don't be running ahead. Very spectacular. Next bit was particularly hairy, in fact, because there was a lot of loose gravel on the bends as well. So just after I took this photo, I had a pretty serious skid, nearly went over the edge, but I didn't, so it was grand. That's, you know, if you live to tell the tale, then it's always a good tale, I guess. The last descent into Salem is pretty grand as well. There's a lot more camper vans on this section. There seems to be bits people can park up. And then you've a lovely little woodland bit in the last 5 or so kilometres. And then in Salem itself, I stayed in the Salem Bay campsite. Again, another good location. And there I had the first real rain.